Okay, right now I am nobody to you. But in 14 minutes, when I've shared my story, I will be somebody. You will know some of my motivations and some of the things that make me tick. We become somebody and stop being nobody when we're willing to share of ourselves. I became a yes person at the age of 18. Saying yes opened my world up to opportunities and quietened the teenage chattering in my mind. Looking to the future was a saviour. When a problem arose, I would box it up and put it high up on the shelf. It made my life fast-moving in the most part, and it helped protect my fragile teenage emotions. I have learnt some 20 years later, I would like to think it was 10, but it's definitely 20, that through avoiding hurt and not accepting it as inevitable to our lives, that we diminish and avoid the pleasure that life actually has to offer. Generally, I had not made good choices when looking for a life partner until I met Paul. Paul had charm and humour and, most importantly, loved me unconditionally, which generally always helps. I was told when looking for a partner to ask myself if he was kind. And Paul was indeed kind. He taught me to accept myself, be okay with a disagreement and all the joy that follows that. He allowed me to fully understand that we cannot venture into the thrashing waves of wondrous joy that love gives us if we are not also prepared to accept walking through the muddy puddles that we have to walk through to get there. Fear and unfamiliarity, I have learned, often go hand in hand when trying to make a change in life. And subsequently, being unsuccessful, usually because we ask ourselves the following questions. What if we fail at the new career? What if he doesn't like me back? What if she says no? Bear with me. How myself and Paul met, we met through different work to that I do now. It was a corporate operational role. And as a woman, I was very eager to get ahead and prove myself to the world and to others. It had been such a huge part of my life. However, it was a roundabout that was constantly on the move, monotonous and sickening in the most part. But if you hold on, it's pretty safe. I knew what to expect and how to make it work, but the roundabout was not suited to me. It's easy to stay in a situation for familiarity, even when it's bad familiarity. It feels safer than jumping off the roundabout into the unknown. Doing something unfamiliar when we have relative safety holding on to that roundabout seems like the craziest and most fearful thing we could possibly do, even when the roundabout has become pretty sickening to be on. On the morning of the 23rd of March, I dropped Paul off for a charity cycle ride. At 8:30 a.m., Paul called me to tell me he thought he was having a heart attack. I tried to call back after 10 minutes, and a paramedic picked up and told me to make my way to the hospital. And at 9:15 a.m. when I arrived, they declared his life as expired. When I walked back into our front door that evening, holding the hospital bag with his belongings, his slippers sat by the door, waiting for him to fill them. I realized that all the things that had once been familiar would never be familiar again. The shelf with all the boxes on was about to come crashing down momentously. I had now not chosen to step off that roundabout. I was now being forced off by a hurricane. I didn't leave the house much in those following months. I couldn't have people around me and lived with the ghost of him in the house and in my life. I'm not sure if you've ever seen the movie Truly, Madly, Deeply. Juliet Stevenson and Alan Rickman. I can see a few nods from the 80s. It's a beautiful story and very romantic in a very strange way, but she lives with the ghost of her husband in the house, and he brings his other ghost friends and has a party and disrupts her grieving process. It was a little bit like that, only less romantic and probably a little bit more crazy, but it was similar. There is one story I wanted to share of those early days. I had managed to get out onto the beach that we lived on, and the sun was setting, and there was a horse being trained to do various impressive backward sequenced moves in figures of 8. In any normal circumstances, I would have been able to live in the present moment as I do now and appreciate what I had in front of me. At the time, I was so consumed by my own sadness, I was barely able to function. Came down the beach a stranger walking his dog. And he came up and asked me if the horse was mine and asked me some questions around living where I was. He started to tell me a story about in America how they train horses. It was this melodic story that kind of encapsulated me for 15 minutes. And that was the first time for those 15 minutes that I had been alleviated from the sadness. That man didn't know the impact that he'd had on that day. I've never met him again. But it alleviated me from the sadness, and it was a kindness. And I truly believe that he came and spoke to me because he thought that I needed it. That story of hope and love was enough to alleviate me and gave me an interesting kindness. My friends might call it a little bit of an obsession on the effects that it has and how we can put more of it into the world. So after 4 or 5 months and finding ways to cope with the overwhelming sadness, which stemmed from everything to writing a diary, watching comedy which I didn't laugh at, but it helped neutralize the sadness in some way, reading about various religions, trying to find an answer to my question that went over in my mind, where have you gone? I eventually started to rise up out of the darkness. This was not because somebody helped me. It was because I was willing to help myself. What I found is as long as you can keep hope in your heart, while you may not be ready to make the change in that very moment, eventually hope will manifest itself and it will become the instrument of change you need to see in yourself and be in the world. My obsession for kindness turned into 100 blogs, traveling the world, seeking out people doing extraordinary acts of kindness, and subsequently created a cause called Sunshine People. Sunshine People is where I do sponsored activities each year. I don't ask people to sponsor me by donating money. I ask them to show their support to my event by doing an act of kindness for a stranger and then telling me about that on the website. This year's event is cycling across America 3,055 miles. I'm not a cyclist, by the way, so hence that's quite a big challenge. My aim is to generate 3,055 acts of kindness. And my previous has been 30, 40 very local. So we're going big or going home, as we had the conversation. I have since completed a whole host of activities, but mostly what saved me in the end is I have worked my way through the life list or bucket list that myself and Paul had made early on in our relationship. Originally, my heart broke 1,000 times to see that on the pinboard, but eventually I used it as the moving, doing, and saying yes to life again. The secret to this, and how I approach life in general, I did not allow this tragedy to be something that happened to me. It was part of my journey. It happened for me, not against me. It is too easy for us to wallow in the things that happen in life and blame others for how our life turns out. The bad grades we got at school, the partner who broke our hearts. The death of Paul could have been portioned to many different people. But it's our reactions to those realizations that allows us to grow. Blame is just a stopper. It just stops you living. Of course, when we step off the roundabout, I would always advocate doing it on your own terms. But facing fears is truly one of the most wonderful experiences. As I have become older, I have become fearful of so many things. And swimming in the ocean is one of them. But last March, you would have found me swimming with the manta rays because Paul had put it on the life list. I'm not so sure about the cage diving that he's put on there, but I'm working my way towards that one. It turns out, though, the manta rays were the most beautiful thing that I have ever done. I've seen what the other life path looks like close up, and now know that there is nothing to lose in anything that we do. It is more scary lying on the living room floor than taking that leap of faith. Fear is mostly based on a vivid imagination. What could happen, not what we know will happen. Fear of change just holds us back from the joy of self-discovery, a place where the world becomes lighter and knowledge easier to find. Before seeing death close up, I was that person holding onto that rail for dear life. It is easy for me now to sit on the park bench and watch it spin and tell others how easy it is to jump off. My advice to anyone who is unsure of making a change or fulfilling a dream is to ask yourself one question. If I only had a year to live, would I regret not doing this? Because your answer to that will tell you if it is something that you should pursue. Regret is the biggest thing discussed in those last dying conversations. I have learned some amazing and great things listening to people all over the world in the past 6 years. And they can be summarized something like this. Be with people. Human connection, good, bad, and indifferent, is the greatest gift to how we develop and find understanding of ourselves if we are willing to learn. Without judgment, really hard, but without judgment, be willing to learn and embrace every culture, country, point of view, and person you encounter. They all have a story that's amazing, interesting, and will teach you something about yourself if you're willing to listen. Be the instrument of change in yourself, and then have something that's more important than you. Put no value on material items. The happiest people I met had nothing at all, and the kindest were willing to give it all away. Lastly, but certainly not least, be as kind as your heart will allow. Continue to work at that skill. I, for one, am always working on it, even though I advocate it so well. But it was what helped me rise from the ashes, and a kindness approach to life will change the world we live in. Thank you very much.